So I'm Still Here, the podcast. I'm Still Here, season 2. I'm Kate.
And I'm Mary.
And this is a podcast about parents who make creative things. This is our second season, and we're doing it from the confines of our homes in our kitchen. So you may hear a child or a partner or our own internal rage. But what we'd like to do on this episode first is chat with one of our season 1 guests who we love so much. So I'd like to welcome Sofija Stefanovic. Hello so much. You can see her in the corner for those of you that are watching. And we were just chatting before we officially began, or maybe it was when we officially began, that this is week 10.
Yeah. Week 10. Oh, it's week 10 of quarantine.
It's week 10 of quarantine. Yeah.
I had not been counting.
Yeah.
It's crazy. That's a long time. So how are you, Sofija? How's quarantine going?
I'm okay. Look, I think all things considered, and as I mentioned to you before we started today, I feel like yesterday and today have been the days when people have just broken. I mean, everyone's been sort of shaky this whole time, right? But this has been the time when, like, I've seen 4 mums outside who are like, give me a therapist recommendation, take my child, or, you know, people crying. So considering that, I didn't cry today.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, I think things are okay. Like I see people around me, people who have more than one child, for example, you know, like for me, that's
guilty. Yeah.
Amazing. So I'm doing okay. I'm trying to be creative. I actually feel a little bit creative, strangely. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she said that she feels bad saying that that she is feeling creative because there are so many people who are finding this time really blocking creatively, and who can't communicate with the muse or even read a book or anything like that. And she was saying she feels guilty for feeling creative.
Mm-hmm.
I've been feeling creative, but I can't tell if it's good or if it's kind of like a beautiful mind that I think I'm doing all these amazing things, and then I'll turn back and I'll read over it and I'll be like, oh no, that's what happened. So I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. Well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Mary.
You know, it's funny because one part of your interview from season 1 that I think about all the time is how you would write at the Y for the free childcare. And now you presumably are not able to go to the Y. So when you feel creative, when are you finding time to actually work?
That's a really good question, Mary, because usually what happens is during the day I have ideas, but because I'm in constant dialogue with my son, who is very talkative now and has repetitive themes that we talk about, I kind of save all my thoughts up, and then usually when I'm trying to get to sleep and exhausted, I can't sleep because I'm thinking of these ideas, or I wake up in the middle of the night, and that's when I'm sending text messages to myself, trying not to wake my partner up because I can't turn on the light, and write in a notebook. So it's all these like bloodshot eyes, bags under the eyes, me with this like intensely, inspired face sending text messages. The problem is all this stuff that I write that eventually goes onto my computer, I haven't read over any of it. So I'm trying to be not critical, but just purely like, if I feel the flow or whatever in those tiny bits of time when I'm on the toilet or in the shower or in bed, the bits of time, that's when I'm trying to write. But who knows what it will be like when I look back.
Yeah. When we wrote, is that what you were talking about, potentially reading? Are we going to get to look into that, or is it private?
I feel like it'll be embarrassing, and I haven't looked at it, but I thought if you want to, because Kate, you mentioned that I might want to share some of my writing, and when you said that, I was like, oh my God, I haven't even read over it. But I thought, seeing as my writing, most of it is in my text messages, I can share some of that just to give you an insight into the
love it.
Chaos.
That is, I could not want anything more.
Same.
So I'll skip like so here so I'm teaching a class at the moment as well, online. So I've got like lots of notes on like readings that come to me like 3 a.m. Alex Chi article on appropriation, you know.
That's a good one.
This is like a scene. Some of these are scenes, some of them are dreams. So one is I'm writing a fiction, like a fictional novel set at a holiday destination. So I'm in a game of, and it's in first person, so it looks like it's me, but it's not, as the character. So this is what she's saying. In the Game of Thrones store, I say something that isn't even an allusion to our childhood, and she says loudly, I was a messed up kid, and it's annoying / hurtful for a number of reasons, including she said it loudly as if to escape me, like when a creepy guy hits on you and you want your friends to come help you. But in this case, I'm the creepy guy and the tourists in the store are her friends. 2, is she implying that I too was messed up, and am I supposed to say me too? Or does she want to distance herself so that like she used to be messed up but isn't anymore, and I guess I am? In any case, at this point, our mothers walk in. This is at 4 a.m, by the way. Okay. Here's another one. This one's entitled About a Fart. I'm not going to read it to you, but that's like the title. So imagine like me waking up going, oh my God, I've got to write this. That one, that's the...
It's brilliant.
That one.
You would get along so well with my daughter.
Then I've got a dream in which, this is quite funny, my agent finds time to talk to me.
It's a dream.
We're in a fancy restaurant and she misses the point of what I'm saying and asks if I want to design clothes as part of my brand. I kind of agree, though I know my talents and clothing design is not one of them. She says it has to be a swimsuit, which makes the whole thing even worse. So that one was at 3. And then after that is another scene in the tourist book about an enchanted garden, and then some notes about tax. So there you go.
That's fantastic. Well, Kate, I think Rufi is here.
Oh, is she? Okay.
I got a notification.
All right. Well, so we're going to elegantly transfer in a moment. But Sofija, I am impressed by, you know, I text myself also, but this is what I do. This is a terrible confession. I don't know how to get emojis on my computer if I want to put them in an email. So I'll text myself an emoji and then cut it and paste it from the iMessage.
That's very savvy.
It's terrible. It makes me feel like every time I'm like, I'm cool. It's like that's the least cool. But I feel like what you're doing is like super smart, because I too have like thoughts in the middle of my head that I have to then try to fish out in the morning. But I should be.
And there's no way you're going to remember it. It's a very, and I'm not sure. Yeah, like I said, I don't know if it's inspiration or if it's like the muse is speaking to me, or if it's just like, this is a tired woman having a really hard time.
Well, I'm so happy that you shared them with us.
Yeah, I am too. And I feel like I wish we had more time to chat. Thank you for checking in with us, though. It's always fun talking to you.
Thank you for checking in.
Thank you for checking in with us. And now you can go rescue your son who's banging on the door.
Bye.
Bye, Sofija.
Nice to see you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Rufi is coming in.
Great. This is truly, this is like hanging out on, there's she. Hi.
She's connecting to audio.
Hi.
Hi there. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here in my weird children's bedroom.
It's very on theme. It's perfect.
We were just, I just realized I have a weird name up here. We were just saying that it's impossible to find a place to do these things. Like you'd think you'd have such freedom, but I'm in my kitchen. It's the only place that I can do this of any place in my home, given the practicalities of children and night and everything else.
And Wi-Fi. Like I have a room all the way towards the back of the house that would be kind of perfect because it's one of the only rooms where the door locks. But you get any signal back there.
Right. I did that the other day. I was trying to teach a class and my husband he's in graduate school in the health profession. So he has these clinic rotations that are over Zoom right now. And he said he could hear me talking. So I couldn't be anywhere near where he was. And then our son, who's 2, like apparently has to have access to 2/3 of the house. So I was like, there's literally nowhere for me to go except my closet.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We both finished your book this week. We both have Rufi's book just came out. This is my book of the month edition. I love book of the month. What was your pub date?
April 28th.
What was your pub date? April 28th. Okay, so not even quite a month yet. Yeah. And have you been doing virtual events?
Yeah, I've gotten to do a number of really fun virtual events. It's kind of nice because you don't have to be in geographic proximity. And so I've gotten to do events with people I probably wouldn't have gotten to do them with.
Yeah, that's so nice. That's such a silver lining, I think, of what's going on. I've gone to literary events, right, that I never would have gotten to go to. Like I went to the one that you did with Stephanie Danler. Which was, in like California. I never would have gotten to go that. Anyway, the Knockout Queen is fantastic, and we feel like we've talked about how we want to just talk about that the whole time, and then Kate reminded me that that's not the topic of our podcast.
That's not the conceit of our podcast. Well, I will say this. So when we first talked about having you come onto the podcast, we were talking about your book and we'd heard about your book. And I think at that point, Mary, you'd started it and I'd had it on my list. And then as we were circling in on this, I realized that you wrote the essay that was both sent to me and that I sent out 1,000 times. I have a 5-year-old son, so I think you wrote it in 2015. You know what I'm talking about, Mother Monster May. And the first time I was aware of the message, I looked it up today, the essay, excuse me, a friend wrote to me and she said, "You're going to be mad that someone wrote it before you did," which is just not speaking to my ability to write an essay in the brilliant way that you wrote it. But the themes that you explored, particularly at that time, my son was a few months old, of, you know, identity and agency and the role of women and anger and creativity and everything, just like really, I just felt like really vibrated with me. And I think with so many other people. Mary, I sent it to you. I sent it around our writing group. So I'm super psyched that you have your book, but I feel like so much of what you hit on in the essay is some of what we explore. I think you take a more, I think it exposes the darker side to a lot of, obviously, what we talk about here on this podcast, which is a lot about like how your life transforms when you become a parent. So that was a lot of me vomiting fangirlness, but also the question I have for you now is, now that it's several years later, what would you make of that now? Like, how do you feel like the themes that you explored in that essay sort of affect you today?
Well, I think that there is a suffocating quality to having very young children. And when you move on to having school-age children, you've become sort of super competent and your kids need you less, and you kind of get a lot of your old self back. But I think that it's almost like you need those terrible early years as some sort of like crucible to harden you or something. I feel like I'm just like a lot clearer about the fact that like nobody's going to prioritize my needs but me. And so I better prioritize them because I'm going to be, you know, and it's not like, oh, I wish someone would prioritize them. Everybody's busy. Everybody's like trying to keep from drowning, you know, and it's not like the kids can do it. And so I think that I think about it sometimes and I think I could not have heard that if someone said that to me when I was still in that space. I didn't believe that it could ever end. And I also didn't want it. It didn't feel meaningful if it was just a phase. It felt like that was diminishing it. But I don't think that that's what phases are. I think that phases are like elemental progressions. And I think that I feel like stronger for having gone through that period when I felt so trapped, because now I don't feel trapped and I feel in charge of making sure I'm never trapped.
How old are your kids now?
Just turned 5 and almost 8.
Okay. And they are, and they're home now during this period, right?
As it's sort of been dawning on me that like they may like, is there going to be school in the fall? I don't know. I really don't know at this point. And I don't know what that means for my productivity and the idea of starting another project in earnest.
I do think it's funny that you were like, it doesn't, I have this freedom, and I'm like looking at you in a kid's playroom as we're all trapped in our homes.
Right.
It's like, now I can do anything as long as I don't go out and breathe the air outside.
The need and the touching of when they're babies and they're really little is, like you can't even have a sandwich unless it's the right moment. You can't eat unless everything outside you is carefully arranged. And so I think that even I'm experiencing as great freedom, just like that I can read a book without someone like touching all over the pages and trying to make it so that I don't read.
Yeah. You can say I'm reading, my oldest is 5, and you can say I'm reading a book and they comprehend it versus like puking on it or something. Yeah,
exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
I reread your essay this week, just in thinking about this conversation, and I guess when I had first read it, I wasn't a mom yet, and rereading it now, you talk about going on a book tour with your 10-month-old, or with your newborn, your new baby, and I did the same thing last year. And and it just brought back this memory of like doing that, and then being in an airport and just suddenly like ordering 2 breakfasts and starting to sob and like not knowing why I was crying. I was like, but I'm happy. Like,
I have it all.
Right. So why am I so tired? So how has it been during this like COVID period? I mean, I guess you're trying to both promote your book virtually and you have your family home, which maybe I would imagine doesn't leave a lot of time for creativity, but
yeah, I think until book promotion is over, those hours get eaten up with doing that, as fun as it is. And honestly, I'm not sure that I'm ready to start another thing, so it hasn't been a huge emotional problem. But I've been honestly a little bit surprised. I think because my husband's also working from home, it's much more egalitarian the way that we're splitting everything up than it was when I worked from home and he worked from an office. Because we can sort of be flexible and work in like little 4-hour chunks. And so I'll take a chunk, he'll take a chunk, I'll take a chunk, he'll take a chunk. And we just sort of don't really have weekends. That's how we make up for the lost hours. But I have no idea what's going to happen. I think he's going to have to go back to work before the kids get to go back to school.
Yeah.
Am I frozen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you froze for a second. It's fine. I'm catching
just
up with
briefly.
you. Yes.
Just briefly. Yeah.
I think that's sort of the dream, though, that it feels egalitarian, because I think for a lot of people that I've talked to, that's still like a challenge, because you're just constantly vying priorities. So it's the fact that you're able to both, take your space with the priorities is amazing. I don't think our home is. I think we've just we've just totally dichotomized. I've had to like leap into work. My husband's had to leap into taking care of the kids. And then we try to like find our overlapping times when we can. But it is so much of like one person closing doors to do their thing that I think is so much of the challenge of this. And I feel like there's less time, even though there's like no commute and, nothing else.
I know.
Mary, what have you found?
I also just feel like I'm a worse mom. Oh, I want to hear about Mary's life. And then we can talk about how I'm a bad mom.
I feel whenever we have this conversation, I feel very privileged because we're like quarantining with our nanny. So I have my same life. Sorry.
Okay, edit. Rufi, how are you about that? No.
My nanny's name is Minecraft.
Yeah, I mean, that said, I do, I still spend, she's not full-time anyway, so I still spend a lot of time with my son, and I am also a bad mother. I mean, since, for example, this morning I wanted to watch a screening of a play by Daniel Kitson, which is screening this week, by the way, if you know who Daniel Kitson is. He's fantastic. Oh, wow. So he screened a play. He's screening a play, and so this is a parenting move, something I never would have done before I had kids. He's screening it in the US, UK, and Australia at 9 p.m. And I was like, ooh, if I do Australia at 9 p.m., I can watch it at 6 a.m., which is like my ideal time to go to an event. So I turned on the play at 6 a.m. and had my son for a few hours. And so there was no way he was going to let me watch a play. And so I took him on a 2-hour walk and just watched the play on my phone while we walked around the neighborhood. And by the end, he was definitely like, get me out of the stroller. What are we doing? But it worked. It was a great play.
It's funny that you say that, because I've never owned a car in my life, but I just rented a car. And one of the things that I've heard about quarantine, and one of the things that's like starting to dawn on me, is people are like, well, that's how you lock your children up. You just put them in a car and drive them around. And like, that's a way of coping, because they're in restraint, like they're restrained.
They're literally restrained. And sometimes it'll make them fall asleep. And the car is great.
Yeah. But I never thought of that. I was like, oh, all of the time. Rufi, how are you a bad mom? I feel like I am a terrible parent right now. I also completely agree. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there's so many ways in which I'm a bad mom. I feel like I'm kind of less okay, or I have fewer resources. And so when they're not okay, sometimes I just get frustrated, and I just don't. I mean, they've lost all their friends, and they're forced only to be with each other all the time. And of course they're fighting, like their whole worlds have been turned upside down. But instead I'm like, could you just try to be grateful for what you have? I mean, like, I'm 4, you know what I mean? I'm just not going to be grateful for what we have. So there's that. I feel like I have less resources to sort of be understanding of wherever they're at. I also the screen time is out of control, and it's not just the time that I need Minecraft to be the babysitter. I have gotten swiftly addicted to Minecraft. And so then like we got a server, and me and my mom and my husband and my 2 sons all go on it, and we like build the house together. So I mean, even in like our family time, they're like glued to iPads, and we're all like in the same weird dark room together. And I'm like, I'm gonna go get firewood, like it's just, it's not a sustainable lifestyle.
I love that image.
But when I had illusions of being
it is temporary.
Back when I thought I would be a good parent. Back when I thought I would be a good parent, they always said with screen time, you have to do it with your kids. Like, isn't that what you're supposed to do? It's like, instead of parking them in front of it, it's like a thing you engage with together. I feel like you're doing screen time right. Like, that's what you're supposed to be doing, is like interacting with them and saying like, how do you feel about it? Versus with me, I'm just like, I'll quickly, like, my son will point to something on Netflix and it's a cartoon, and I'm like, that seems appropriate. And then I'll quickly Google like, what's the website that you go to, and it'll say like, there's no sex in this, and I'll be like, perfect. And then that will buy me 20 minutes to be away. But yeah, I'm not building a house with my kids. I'm like doing a cursory 15-second search to make sure that he won't watch someone be killed in front of him when I walk away from the screen. And then I'm like, that's sorted.
We have totally given up on the avoiding watching people be killed thing, because my older son is like sensitive and gets anxious and upset about violence, but my younger son is just like, whatever. I mean, who cares? It's very weird. And so like we let him watch Blade when he was like just turned 4. It's very bad. Lots of questionable parenting going on.
Yeah. Kate, you had a good
Anyway.
a couple of questions you wanted to ask Rufi that I thought were good.
I did have a few questions that I wanted to ask, but I wanted to say something about questionable parenting as we get into the questions, which is I do a story time every morning with my kids, and every morning a different parent reads, and I feel like that is the time, while I have my entire parenting community watching, that I do the worst parenting, to the point where I hung up the other day and people started texting me and they were like, "We got your back, girl. We understand. This is hard." Like, and then I got meta upset because I think, because I'm so upset that I think one of the things is that my son is acting out because he's very social and isn't getting to socialize. And so then I was like, oh, look, I've developed this great group of parents who like rally around me when they see that it's hard, and he's not getting that. And he's sabotaging it by like screaming fart when I'm trying to read, and it just took me to a dark place. But the good news is I'm recording all of these things, so I'll be able to replay them and like obsess over it in the rest of my life. So what were some of the questions that I had going on? I guess, well, I think you sort of answered the question that I had. Yes, what was that? Rufi, I'm here for you.
Oh, I just, in terms of like recordings of yourself, I've never had as much video footage as I have of myself over the last month. Wait, am I breaking up? No, we haven't.
No, I
can
can hear
delay.
you. I can totally hear you.
You can hear it? Okay.
We
can hear you.
So,
yeah.
Okay. I think that, so I've made all these videos, and some of it's just doing video events like this, and that's, it's traumatizing enough just to like watch your face on a little Skype screen. But I also was then trying to make like promo videos and stuff where I was taking videos of like me and the boys jumping on the trampoline and then piecing them together in iMovie. And I just realized that like I ignore them all the time. Like I'm half listening almost 100% of the time. And so a lot of times I have a narrative memory of an afternoon and I'm listening to one of them and ignoring the other one. And I have no idea what the one I'm ignoring has actually said. And I'm only tuned into the one that I'm listening to. And it switches back and forth. It's not that I ignore both of them or, one more than the other, but there's fully 50% of the things that they say to me I don't hear. And it must be like trying to be around like a stoned math professor or something. Like, I think that I'm constantly kind of elsewhere, and whether that elsewhere is dreaming about a novel or a to-do list or what their brother is screaming in my other ear, I'm almost never giving them my undivided attention. And so I've been trying to do that in little moments. And like the scary thing is that it matters so much. Like 5 minutes of me just like looking directly into my 5-year-old's face and then being like, and what else do you want to build in Minecraft? It makes him in a good mood for like 4 hours afterwards. And I just can't believe it took me that long to understand that I wasn't paying attention.
I really relate to that. I realized the other day I was doing the same. Like I'll often even I'll have like one AirPod in because I'm listening to a podcast while we're playing, and so I'm like half paying attention. And then it kind of hit me like, oh, maybe I should consider occasionally giving my kid my undivided attention. Like it just had like never struck me as something I should be doing, which is sad. It makes me feel terrible.
Absolutely.
Oh, the thing that I was saying though was that Mary with the earbud or with like the ignoring is that like I feel like I am with my husband and my two children all of the time, and it is so hard to be with them. You know what I mean? Like I'm coexisting in the space, and part of it is because I'm like trying to cram in work with everything else, and everything's so like heightened and fraught that I feel like the time that I get to have a real conversation with my husband is so small. Or like I'll talk to my son's teacher and I'll be like, I don't know if he did that. Maybe I should ask my husband if we did that thing. Like it doesn't mathematically make sense, the amount of quality time that we have together right now.
Yeah, that's
I know
true.
exactly what you mean. Especially the school stuff is really complicating everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Is your son in kindergarten, your youngest? Or
he will be starting kindergarten in the fall,
Yeah,
and
mine
I
too.
have no idea how that's going to be. You can't do distance kindergarten, you know?
Yeah.
And it would be so good for him. Like he needs to go and have his own world where he's not the little brother, where he's not the baby.
Yeah.
And it's easier to imagine doing it successfully with my 8-year-old, but even then, like, I don't know that it's all like in 15 different apps, and just like looking at the sheet of what we're supposed to do makes me feel frantic.
Completely. Yeah. And the Zoom classroom sessions are just like complete. Like my son, as I said, he just like isn't responding well to it, even though he's very social. And so it's just like a nightmare. And then people are like leaving their mics on as they leave, and their kids are yelling and they're crashing. It's just like total, it's absolutely
mayhem.
awful, terrible.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Mary, what were we were going back and forth in questions, and we said that we weren't going to make this all about the knockout queen, but we did want to talk about it a little bit because it was so good. And you had some really good questions about it.
I had a couple questions. I'm curious just generally how, I mean, I know we've talked a bit already about your essay that you wrote when I think your youngest, soon after your youngest was born. I don't know, within a year or so after.
Yeah.
I'm curious how and if parenting has affected your approach to writing, and specifically fiction. And if you, like with the Knockout Queen, how long were you working on this novel? And I think there's so much, it's so complex, and there's, it touches on like misogyny and the patriarchy and homophobia and all of these things that I feel like are relevant to being a parent, especially raising boys. And so, I know that's like a big question. Like, how does being a parent overlap with the themes of this novel? But I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, I mean, I think that I was raised by a single mom and my grandma. And so it was only women in the first part of my life. And then in this part of my life, I live with my husband and my two sons. And so it's only men. And honestly, growing up, we had no family friends that were men. Like I didn't have any teachers that were men. And so I really didn't understand how men worked, and they seemed really alien to me for a long time. And so I feel like my whole understanding of male rites of passage and consciousness is really like almost new understanding of the last 10 years or so. And I think that makes me, I think that's probably part of why the book is taking apart gender. I think I started with the idea of female violence, and I'm sure that some of that, I mean, I think the scariest thing about being a mom is the moments when you lose it and you snap at your kids and you yell or you grab their hand or whatever line it is that you feel like you've crossed, and you didn't mean to do it, but you did. And so I think that that's another sort of way in which being a mom was informing my thinking about that, because Bunny very much has this you know, she sees red and she has this reaction, and then the rest of her life she has to pay the consequences for something that she didn't do consciously. I also think like having babies changed my opinion of what kind of animals we are. Like I can still remember we were potty training my oldest, so he was like 2, and we were waiting for him to poop on the potty, and so I was like reading him a book, and he was like drinking chocolate milk out of this thermos, and it was a thermos that he picked out that had princesses all over it, and I was like, oh, like, you know, sure, I'll get you this princess thing. I was sort of like pleased that he wanted a girl thing at all. And then, sorry, the turtle is like diving off his rock and it's making loud noises. So if it sounds like weird water sounds, it's the turtle. But so he's sitting there and he's shitting and he has an erection. And then he starts talking about the boobs on the princesses. And I'm like, oh my God, all this is wired up this way. Like it doesn't come together later. Like it's installed, you know, it comes with the machinery. And so I think, I mean, in so many ways, my questions about like my experience, myself as a writer is informed so much by being a mother that I don't think I could even untangle what's not part of that at this point. It was a really profound transformation in the way that I saw things when I had children. I don't know. I feel like for a lot of women, it's that way.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
Oh my God, you know me so well. You can tell my breathing. I'm agreeing with the rage, but it's you're like my, no, I remember in my early 20s, I was an actor and I was taking an acting class, and the acting teacher said something like she was trying to get me to feel an extreme feeling. And she was like asking every question. And the only thing she could ever get me to do was cry, which I did pretty well. Just cause I'm a baby, I guess. I shouldn't say that. Crying is not a sign of weakness. My goodness, that's archaic. But now, like, my joke after having kids is I was like, I would freaking nail any audition I went into because I have the entire spectrum of human emotion at my fingertips at every moment. Like there's wild mania, there's rage in particular. I agree with you. Like I've never felt it before. I remember with my son, I kicked the wall so hard. I think I like did a hairline fracture in my shin. I was like banging pillows against the couch, you know, screaming at them. And not only that, I was like so lacking in self-awareness that was an extreme response to things that I was like casually throwing it into conversation that weren't about parents with non-parent. You know, I'd be like, oh yeah, well, I was like rage screaming into a pillow the other day and people were like, holy crap, who are you?
Okay?
Where is the person that I knew? Yeah. But absolutely. So I wonder, like, to that end, as we're speaking of rage, which is one of my, this is the thing, I've mentioned this before. I saw an ad for a microphone for karaoke that you could do on the subway and it just muffles your singing and I was like, I can use that for primal screaming. And then I guess there is something that people use to vocalize, you know, like in apartments, like vocalists, but I've honestly seriously researched it and the reviews are very bad, so I haven't gotten either of them. Anyways, back to rage.
That is very interesting.
Rufi, what was your relationship with yeah, I know it would be a good idea. I did consider getting a zip car and screaming in that, and I am excited about my rental car for that reason, should the rage return, which it likely will, let's be honest. What was your relationship with anger prior to, or I mean, not that rage is obviously not the prevalent emotion in this book, or not, it's one of many things, but in particular, I guess, as we were just speaking, at how you've discovered a new side of it in becoming a parent.
Oh, for sure. I mean, two things that feel related to me. In my house, anger was a completely forbidden emotion. And my mother and my grandmother both displayed anger as just coldness and withdrawal. And then you would have to guess what you did and they would like never confirm it. So it was a lot of like mind reading and being like hyper aware of how what you said and did affected other people. And it made me I think probably a better fiction writer because I was constantly guessing what other people were thinking. But it also made me exceptionally bad at telling people what I wanted and asking for what I wanted and wielding authority, kind of. And if there's one thing that's having small children, it gets you completely comfortable saying no, getting mad, being the bossing people around. I can remember when I got my first dog when I was 21, I had a really hard time with the idea that I was supposed to be her master or tell her what to do or not do. I really didn't want that to be so. I felt like that was really uncomfortable. And we just got a new puppy and I'm like, no, like it's so easy. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what to do with you. You're like a little stupid child. So, I think that anger has gotten much more accessible and also less scary. I used to be really scared if people were angry at me. And that's kind of a terrible way to hold people hostage if they're never allowed to get mad, you know? And so I feel like I've gotten desensitized to anger a little bit, and that's been very helpful.
Yeah.
Is this because, and I'm also thinking because, you know, rage does play such a big role in the book, and especially in the way that you're describing, where, you know, Bunny sees red and snaps, and that has this determinative effect on her future. Had you had the idea for this before you were a parent, or was this novel entirely conceived and written post motherhood?
Well, so I had written a collection of interconnected short stories titled Bunny Lampert that was all sort of a portrait in negative space of Bunny Lampert. And, you know, she was like a peripheral or secondary character in each of these stories. And that was before I even published The Girls from Corona del Mar. That was like, you know, 10 years ago.
Oh.
And so she's been in the back of my mind, and she came very much from, I was at a party in Brooklyn when I was in college, and there was this girl boxer there. And I think it was partially traumatic brain injury, but I also think there were drugs involved, but she kept not remembering where she was and why she was there. And she had this kind of creepy little boyfriend who was taking care of her. And I didn't know her at all. I don't think I was even introduced to her or had a conversation with her, but she, I mean, obviously haunted me for like a decade. And so it really started with this idea of like a female boxer, and also the ways in which taking on that super aggressive role ultimately winds up turning you into a victim. I don't know. There's something about the sacrifice of the body that professional athletes, you know, anywhere from football to ballet really undergo that is very poignant to me, because you're like literally ruining yourself in pursuit of an ideal or in pursuit of like a, you know, perfection of some kind. And so I think I started there, but I didn't come up with this plot. It was when we were moving to El Segundo just a few years ago. There was this one realtor who seemed to represent like almost every house. And I just kept thinking, who's this guy? You know? And then I thought, what if that guy was your dad? And then all of a sudden I thought, like, that's the worst possible situation for Bunny to grow up in. Like, really, is having that guy as a dad. And so I kind of came up with this. So none of the plot was part of my earlier conception of her. The plot was all very much part of the present moment. But I think that these themes have been of concern to me for a long time. And a lot of it is my grandparents were alcoholics and really, really abusive. And so a lot of my storytelling impulse is trying to make sense of why people did what they did and why they do terrible things. Like, I remember getting obsessed for like a year trying to understand why someone would rape somebody else, because my experience is, my desire is so predicated on being desired I had a really hard time even figuring out what they were getting out of it, and how that could be turning them on. Like it was really something that I didn't understand. And so I think that I am constantly trying to understand. I've never hit someone. And I think that that makes it interesting to me, trying to piece together why people did that, you know, why people do terrible things has been, you know, the speculation of my whole life.
Yeah. I think there's also, you know, there's the obvious thing, and you said it about, you know, athletes and professionals where you have to completely surrender your body to the vocation. And I wonder what, you know, obviously bearing children is a surrender of the body and a transformation of the body, regardless of what your experience is. And if did that experience play into also the way you started to conceive portions of this book?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that before I had kids, I really was not that interested in the fact that I had a body. Like I was interested in trying to make it look a certain way, or being worried that it looked the way it did, but I was not, I wasn't really fully in that animal part of myself. I stayed very much like just in my head. Like I could have been sort of like they could have uploaded me to a computer, no problem. But there's something about gestation and the sort of, there's a very primordial animal aspect to giving birth to children. And then like I had a really scary first birth where I had a C-section that I very much didn't want. And even that, I felt like meat. I felt like tainted and unclean in this new way, that I think it is the other side of your animal nature, is also like the sense in which you feel like meat. I realize that's like a super dark thing to say. I'm sorry.
100, but I 100% relate. I think I've had various relationships with my body, but being pregnant, particularly the first time, you know, experiencing all those things for the first time, I'd never felt more in love with my body. I just loved it. I loved that I could do it. I had the easiest pregnancy, but then I too, and I've also, my family is, we like pride ourselves in being very healthy and very hardy. We don't get sick. We don't, you know, until we do, but then I also had a terrible birth with my son, and it was an emergency C-section that I also very much did not want. And I felt my body had never failed me. And I had been on this like upswing of like, now not only has my body not failed me, but I love the way it looks. I love what it's doing. And then in like, you know, 24 hours, that was like the rug was pulled out. And I suddenly was like, oh, I'm vulnerable. I felt weak. I felt like I'd failed. And then you know, you just really do feel like when you've been cut up and things are just all sorts of moved around. Do you feel, how do you feel now? Like how has that affected you sort of now, I guess now 8 years out, but with another child in between?
Well, I feel, I mean, and talk about rage. I think that was almost the hardest thing about that birth, was dealing with all the anger afterwards and all the rage, because nobody wants to hear it. You're alive, the baby's alive, shut up and take care of the baby, you know, and it just seems like a lot of whining. And it's hard to explain, like, it seems like it should be so obvious why having someone you don't trust cut open your body and pull your entrails out should be upsetting. It seems like if you've had it happen to you, you're like, yeah. Obviously that would be upsetting. But there's something like where it's partitioned in this way, like kind of the way that we don't kill the chickens and pluck them. We just buy them already prepackaged in the grocery store. There's this way that we pretend that surgery is not what it is.
Yeah.
And in order to make it okay. And so I think that part of that disconnect for me was me knowing what had happened and everyone else being like, but we're pretending that didn't happen. And trying to just sort of process all that rage. I was lucky because I kind of got to have this redemption story with my second son, where I had a really good birth and where I felt like restored in my power in my body. And so I think anger, if you can't figure out a healthy way of expressing it, can kind of become acidic and eat away at you and make you not like who you are. And I'm not saying that I was eaten away with anger at my doctor or anything, but I do feel like there was this part of me that was kind of frozen with self-hatred, that I had failed in this way, that nobody understood why I was upset. It was sort of this like version of reality where I'm like, okay, so like only 80% of reality is communicable, and there's always going to be 20% that people just can never understand about you, that you can't say to someone, even someone who loves you, and they'll get it. And I was able to let go of that as like my theory of reality after my second son, because it was just like it was just a really healing experience. Healing itself is interesting, I think, in terms of how we conceive of it.
Yeah, what was healing about the second birth?
Well, I was really lucky in that I got to give birth with midwives in a hospital. And so they had sort of taken over this wing of a hospital and trained all the nursing staff. And so it was a nursing staff used to dealing with moms who were laboring naturally, who were prioritizing progression of labor. And there was just so much respect. I don't know how else to explain it, but like, they looked in my face when they were talking to me. They asked questions and seriously listened to what I said. I mean, that sounds so basic, but it was that basic. It was like the moment that I was there, I was like, oh, I'm safe here. You know, these people are going to treat me like a person. Whereas the panic of my first time had sort of been realizing like, nobody's going to listen to me. Everything that I say is discounted. Like I am now cast as this like irrational person who doesn't know what's going on and isn't in control and has to be managed. And that was really scary because I was like, no, I'm still in here, guys. Like, it's still me.
Yeah, I mean, I did not have a C-section, but I felt that way. I mean, I relate to everything you're saying. Like sort of being viewed as the irrational one in the room who's being really emotional and then I remember telling my mom, like a year after my son was born, that it was so strange to me the day, so I gave birth at night around 7 p.m. And then the next day, like everyone coming to visit, you know, friends coming to visit and my family coming to visit at the hospital and everyone passing around the baby. And like, it was surreal to stand there and realize everyone was treating me like I didn't have a giant gaping wound in the middle of my body. Like, am I the only one who remembers how the baby got here? Like, no, like people, not that I needed people to be offering to wait on me or anything, but I kind of did. Like, I kind of expected like someone could offer to get me some food or something, but no, it's like, oh, she's perfectly capable of doing everything she normally does.
Oh, for sure. Well, and there's that trope about like, you know, people come over and they want to hold the baby while you go, like, I guess, do chores or something. It's like, all I wanted to do was hold my baby. Like, you go make the dinner. I want to sit on the couch and hold the baby.
Right. While you go make them like a cheese plate because they came over.
Yeah. Exactly.
I did find, speaking of rage, while we're on the subject of rage and having children, it's only in hindsight that I see that I think some of that rage was protection against all of like the vulnerability and fear that I was feeling. And I realized that this is like psychology 101. But I do think like, I actually think I was induced, and maybe I could have fought the induction, or maybe I couldn't have, and maybe I wouldn't have my child. We don't know. But I felt like I was being cared for well. And I got into such a state of fear because I'd never, ever feared that anything would go wrong with my body, that I lost my grip of reality and like just and I was like, okay, like I didn't advocate, or I didn't need to advocate, or didn't feel like I could, because I was like, I'm falling apart. I have no reality to cling to. And then because of that, I think I was so thrown and so vulnerable and sad that a lot of like, I think my postpartum rage was like around that. It was like, I don't know how to feel these like extraordinary feelings of like vulnerability and sadness about some of the things that are happening at this also happiest time of my life.
Oh yeah. I really 100%. I feel like there was almost like a double narrative at all times, where I was experiencing joys that I didn't feel like anyone else was truly experiencing, and also experiencing loss and pain that was invisible to everybody else. It felt like everybody else was in a sitcom or something. And I was like, what is wrong with you people?
Oh, that's so well put. Yes.
And they didn't get the notes on the genre of the show we're all doing right now.
Like you're on the set of like a multicam show, but you're not, but it's actually your life.
Oh yeah.
Well, any last questions, Kate, before we let Rufi go?
Oh, Rufi, Mary and I were going to talk at the top about roses and thorns of the week. I'm sure you know this as a parent of young children, like a great success and a great sort of disappointment. And I wonder if you would have one to share with us as you live in this COVID life. What's a bright light and what's a dark chasm?
Of like something specific that happened in the week?
Yeah, like in this last week as we're living in this sort of strange reality.
I'm trying to think of my bright light. I guess that I feel like I had this moment with my older son that I felt like he always thinks that when we're mad, it's because he's bad. And I stressed to him, like we had this conversation where I was just over and over again saying that that's not what it means, that we are sometimes mad for our own reasons, or because we're frustrated or we're tired or whatever, but also because we just want him to behave differently, and that he doesn't have to go through the ordeal of feeling ashamed, that he can just change the behavior. And that's really all we want. And I would prefer if he never felt terrible, you know, but that because he tends to like then replay that mistake or that hurt over and over again. And after we had this conversation where I couldn't really tell how much went in or not, he was just so light. He was so light for, you know, days afterwards. I still feel like he's kind of different. So that was like my good moment. And then my thorn, that I do not understand how to deal with my 5-year-old's like rampant materialism. It is bizarre. I mean, like, so his birthday was this weekend, and he blew out the candles and he said, "I want a lot of money." And we were like maybe wish for something else. And he's like, "I want a Lamborghini." And I'm like, I didn't even know you knew what a Lamborghini was. I'm not sure if I actually picture a Lamborghini that I'm picturing the right car. And I don't know where it comes from, but he like is constant. I think he was like a sultan in a past life or something. He's always talking about his imaginary house and all the things that he's going to have. And I just like, I'm totally alienated by it. And I have no idea like what to do. And every time he brings it up, I get kind of like uncomfortable.
That is so funny.
Every time my son makes a reference to something I don't know, I'm like, it's probably the TV show that I quickly Googled and then let him watch for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
maybe there are Lamborghinis in children's shows.
Oh, probably. I mean, and gosh knows, because they watch all these YouTubers too. I mean, YouTube is like the major cultural shift that I didn't see coming and had not understood had occurred until I had children that were watching YouTube. Do your kids watch YouTube?
No, not yet. No.
Oh
in fact,
God.
just in quarantine, he's learned how to like turn his own shows on in Netflix, but you still have to sort of get him there. Gosh, YouTube will be a whole new thing. Oh boy. Yeah. Ugh.
By
There's
YouTube,
so
you mean
Lots
much.
ahead for us, Mary.
like people making their own videos on YouTube or something? Like, I don't even know what
so like, okay, so with the Minecraft obsession then came the desire to watch tutorial videos, like how do I make a crafting table? How do I do this or that in Minecraft? And then there are these celebrities basically who were 10 years ago nerdy teenagers making a YouTube channel, but now have, you know, like 4 million views on every single video and are insanely like wealthy millionaires that are, you know, just like random personalities. And they have, then it grows, like their little empire grows, and they have videos that are just like them pranking their mom, or like like a weird fight with their wife or girlfriend or something. And it's so bizarre because each like gamer becomes this little sitcom. And I think that some of them realize that their audience is children. I'm sure they didn't start out thinking they were making content for like 4 to 8 year olds, but that's what they do. And they cater to it to a lesser or greater degree. But so there is a ton of wish fulfillment videos of like, I'm going to fill my whole backyard swimming pool with like those balls from ball pits, with plastic balls. And then we're going to go swimming in the plastic balls. I'm going to fill my whole living room with snow. We're going to do like, we're going to go buy a bunch of iPhones and then try and sell them to people in the park for $1. And it's all about this consumption. And I think that that is probably part of it. I think it's a big part of it.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. We're in for it.
Wow. Oh, I'm staying inside my house forever.
Dude, I had no idea how famous these internet people were. And then all of a sudden, once I knew their channels, then I would see that like all these kids were wearing their merch, as it is called. It's a whole world. I really, really actually would love to write a book about YouTubers. I feel like, like it must be done.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I would love that.
Yeah. Oh boy. Speaking of YouTube, this video of this podcast will be on YouTube. It's not a very dynamic video. It's basically largely us off video with a yellow square hopping between us. But I guess people put podcasts on YouTube these days, and that's what Mary and I are doing in this world. Rufi, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a delight. I could talk to you forever. It's so nice to speak to you, having read so many of your words.
Oh, well, thank you. Do I not get to hear your roses and thorns?
Oh, we can share roses and thorns. No, we didn't. Mary, what's your rose and thorn?
So my rose is that my herb garden is thriving that I made during COVID. And it's the first like plant, like living thing that is not an animal that I haven't killed. That sounds like I've killed animals, which I haven't, but I've always killed plants, and my herbs are thriving. And then the thorn is that Finn continues to wake up between 4 and 5 a.m. every day.
Oh.
So that is happening. But that's not new, but it's an ongoing
It's still
thorn.
A thorn. That's a big thorn.
Yeah.
It would be nice if that stopped. Yeah.
It would be so nice. Kate, what about you?
My roses. So my husband and I have picked up a lot of, we're doing, like, we live in Brooklyn. We're doing the classic thing. Like, my husband has a sourdough starter. He's making bread and whatever. And then we've started collecting snails. We have these pet snails that are ostensibly for our son that are really for him. But then the greatest thing we did is we got this bag of mushroom spores and grew mushrooms very quickly, like in under 2 weeks. And so now we're harvesting mushrooms. They're beautiful. So we're harvesting these mushrooms, and we harvested our first batch yesterday, and he made pasta. He manifests anxiety by cooking.
Oh, yummy.
So he made fresh mushrooms that we grew in our kitchen on fresh pasta. That was our Monday night dinner. So that was certainly a rose.
Fantastic.
Oh, the mushrooms are so good. I wish I could share them with all of you. And then, gosh, what thorn to choose from?
From the many thorns.
Yeah, of the many thorns. I mean, I think like there is this like, as I mentioned before, this spin out that I have over the fact that the worst of my parents. Okay, so that day where my friends were texting me afterwards after story time, and they were like, you know, you're doing it, mama. The thing that they couldn't see that was off camera, that was like kind of the worst of all things. And this speaks to the conversation we were having earlier about rage. So I was the reader, so I was trying to hold the book up to the camera of this like gallery of lovely kids and their parents. And so my kids were slightly off camera, and they were just like wrestling and, you know, whatever, that like being jerks. And I would calmly say like, all right, kiddos, remember, we're going to listen to the story. Can we do that? Your friends can't hear you. Like trying to be really calm. But at one point I got so annoyed that we were sitting on my bed that I grabbed my daughter with one hand while holding the book and ripped her off of my son in a way that only in the action of doing it, I realized felt far more angry than I actually was. Like I was trying to quickly fix it, and I threw her back and she started screaming, crying. And then I had to go on mute for a gallery of my peers and just be like, 1 second. And then I don't know, I'm sure they couldn't see in my eyes because I texted, and it did all happen off camera, but I'm like, did 10 of my like community of mothers just watch me manhandle my 2-year-old, even though it was not, I should say it wasn't, it was just that I moved her more quickly than I expected to, but you know, that like flash of like agency that you have. So that I had this, I was like, I'm going to go on mute and also like ponder whether people watched me hold a 2-year-old with one arm and rage. So that was that was not my favorite part of the week.
Yeah. Oh man. I feel like we've all done it, but it just hasn't been on like a Skype call. That's the nightmarish quality to it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no one seems to be having their thorns on camera, I'll say it again. Or if they do, like I sort of, you know, that maybe they go off video, but like when you're the one reading the story, like I was like, what was the story that I was reading to? Oh, it was this like long story about Katherine Jackson, one of the hidden figures, you know? So it was like literally my son picks these books that are the biography of these people's lives, but it truly is terrible storytelling. It's every moment of I shouldn't say that, it's not that terrible. But when your children are misbehaving, it does feel like, do we need every detail of this woman's life? Don't we know she was a computer? Like, you know, I just want to get there so that I can end the book. It's actually not a bad book, but anyway, lots of thorns.
They understand. I feel like they understand.
At 15 minutes. Yeah. Okay, so now super thank you for coming onto our podcast and guiding the structure of our podcast.
It was really fun.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I feel like you're my friends now.
Oh, I know, yay. And thank you for writing this book. We loved it so much. I'm recommending it to everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's so brutal and so wonderful.
Oh, thank you.